Godot's default settings for its built-in code editor are intended to be both approachable for beginners and generally agreeable to the broader user base, which makes sense, but if you have experience in software development outside of Godot, or have even just been working with the engine for a while, you'll be particular about how you like to do things. So here's a few items you may want to configure in the editor settings window to make your coding experience more agreeable. First off, we can do the basic configuration of setting our desired font size for both the editor and our code under Editor Settings in the Interface tab. Alternatively, you can just hold down Control and scroll the mouse wheel up and down in the code editor to make the font larger and smaller. This section is also the place to set custom fonts if you have a preferred typeface when coding. Though note that, as of this writing, Godot 3 does not support fonts with custom ligatures such as Fira code, although I've seen a little bit of conversations on GitHub about this possibly coming in Godot 4. Now, as you might guess, just about every setting under text editor is worth looking at if you really want to customize your experience. But based off of what people typically care to customize in my experience, let's first hop down to the indent tab where we can pick our side in the battle of tabs versus spaces, how many spaces to indent by, and the option to toggle tab and space highlighting in the editor. Next up, in case you haven't noticed, Godot does offer guidelines for line length in the editor to help keep your code more readable, and you can configure these guidelines or turn them off under the Appearance tab. The defaults of 80 and 100 would normally be probably a bit old school for my taste, but I'll admit that with the other menus open on either side in Godot, I actually find them to be a pretty good default, but adjust as you like. Let's now make a quick stop at the Tools tab, because if you're like me and hate the fact that the methods list of your current script defaults to the order it appears in the script instead of alphabetically, you can turn on Sort Members Outline Alphabetically to instead get an alphabetized list of methods, which makes this a lot more usable in my opinion. And lastly, there's several options worth looking at under the Completion tab. Code complete delay is how long Godot waits to give you code completion suggestions, so set this high if you generally find them unhelpful or just don't like them, or you can set this lower than the default to get suggestions immediately as you type. This next one is my personal favorite. If you prefer to write your code as statically typed as possible like I do, you can toggle add type hints to have Godot's autocomplete for functions include default typing so you don't have to manually add them after the fact. This saves a lot of annoyance over the course of a project. And finally, for those of you that prefer single quotes over double quotes for strings, you can check use single quotes so that Godot's autocomplete for strings, such as on signal names, will use single quotes by default. So we've configured the built-in editor a fair bit now, but despite all these changes, Godot's editor can still feel a bit bare bones at times. So you may instead just be interested in using an external editor, such as VS Code, to do the bulk of your coding in. There exist both official and unofficial Godot plugins for VS Code that give you code completion and syntax highlighting and so on, and combined with all the goodness that VS Code brings to the table, you can end up with a pretty nice coding experience going this route. You can even configure Godot to open your preferred external editor automatically when you open a script by going to Editor Settings, Text Editor, External, and following the directions in the official Godot docs for your preferred editor. Link for that will be in the description. And that's it for today. Just a few ways to hopefully improve your coding experience in Godot. Do check out the settings for yourself, as there are other parameters not mentioned here that you may find useful.